Hi, welcome to Movie Digest. In this video I'm going to explain 2009 romantic comedy movie titled The Proposal. Spoilers ahead. The movie starts off with Andrew Paxton jumping out of bed realizing he's overslept and could be late for work. He rushes out and gets to the office in the nick of time. Just as he gets to his desk, Margaret Tate walks into the office. Everyone gets scared and looks away as she hurriedly walks past them and heads to her office, while Andrew is waiting for her. Margaret is an editor-in-chief of a book publishing company in New York, and Andrew is her assistant. Margaret fires an editor named Bob Spaulding, who tries to embarrass her by yelling at her in front of the entire office. She remains calm, and then threatens to have security escort him out if he doesn't leave immediately. Once he's gone, she tells Andrew that she's gonna need him this weekend, causing him to break plans to attend his grandmother's 90th birthday party. His father berates him over the phone and urges him to quit. When he notices Margaret coming towards him, he pretends like speaking with a writer, but she's onto him and asks if his family told him to quit. He replies, "Every day." Later, she's called into the office of her bosses, who tell her that because she left the country to woo a new writer a few months ago, causing a visa term violation and will be deported back to Canada. This would mean that she would lose her job. Margaret suggests she can work remotely, but to her disappointment she can't work for an American company. They also plan to give her position to Bob, whom she just fired, since he is the only editor in the building with enough experience. At that moment, Andrew interrupts with a phone call from a writer. Margaret tells him to take a message, so he asks if he should say she is otherwise engaged. Margaret's eyes light with an idea. She calls Andrew into the office and announces to her bosses that she and Andrew are getting married. He tries to deny it, but she convinces them otherwise. After they leave the office, she blackmails Andrew to marry her until she gains her citizenship, because if she got deported, Bob will definitely fire him, and all the work he put in as her assistant will be lost and he will never become an editor. He reluctantly agrees and heads over to immigration with her. At the office, they meet immigration agent Mr. Gilbertson. He suspects they are committing fraud to avoid Margaret's deportation. He also tells them that they will be asked questions about each other separately. If their answers do not match, Margaret will be deported to Canada permanently and they will convict Andrew of a felony, punishable by a $250,000 fine and 5 years in prison. Andrew seems like he's going to crack, but Andrew decides to turn things into his favor, and blackmails Margaret into promoting him. They tell him that they were going to announce their engagement at his grandmother's party that weekend in Alaska. Gilbertson schedules an interview for both of them to start the process, and warns their answers should match up in every account. After leaving the office, Andrew demands to be promoted immediately and publish his manuscript. She initially denies, and Andrew decides to quit and leave Margaret on her own. Realizing she needs him, Margaret agrees upon his request, gets down on her knees and proposes. He teases her for a moment before accepting. They travel first class for some part of their journey, where Andrew suggests Margaret to prepare for the interview as he knew everything about her. Later, they take a smaller and less comfortable plane to Sitka, where Andrew's from. When they arrive, Andrew's warmly greeted by his mom Grace and grandma Annie, called as Gammy. They get excited to meet Margaret, who gets uncomfortable and acts cold. Margaret soon realizes Andrew came from a wealthy family, who owns many businesses in town. Grace then reveals that they canceled her hotel reservation, so she could stay with them. Margaret gets scared while she climbs down to get to the boat, and head to their house. They give Margaret a life jacket after telling she can't swim. Upon arriving at the Paxton mansion, Margaret questions why he didn't tell her he was rich. He replies that he isn't, but his parents are. Andrew is surprised to be greeted by the whole town in a welcome home party, since he's been gone about 3 years. Margaret and Andrew agree that he'll decide how and when to announce the engagement, but are interrupted by his father, who humiliates Andrew in front of the guests. Andrew then confronts his father Joe, who is angry about Andrew dating the boss he has so long disliked, and believes he is using her to get ahead in his career. But his father gets shocked when Andrew reveals that he was going to marry her. Andrew soon announces the engagement. Suddenly, Andrew's ex-girlfriend Gertrude shows up, who asks Margaret how Andrew proposed to her. They both have an awkward moment while inventing a story, where Andrew got Margaret to a hotel room by leaving her some clues. She thought he was cheating, but instead was surprised to find him in a tuxedo in a hotel room on a blanket of rose petals and hand-cut hearts, where he sobbingly proposed. The crowd clanged glasses in joy, and forced them to kiss. That night, Margaret and Andrew are shown to their room, a large beautiful bedroom with a gorgeous view of the nearby lake. Assuming they are living together, Gammy gives them a blanket, and teases them by telling it has special powers for making babies. Margaret tosses it aside, and Grace and Gammy leave them to rest. Andrew makes his bed on the floor and Margaret sleeps on the bed. Because they're in Alaska, it's bright even at night, so Grace tries to find a comfortable way to sleep. Andrew, hearing her being uncomfortable, activates remote-controlled curtains, which darken the room. The next morning, Margaret's phone ringing awakens them. She answers and moves about the room, searching for a signal. Andrew yells at her to leave, so she heads downstairs and out the front door, followed by the family puppy. As she's talking, she realizes her mistake of leaving the door open, and runs to protect the pup from a hungry eagle. The eagle grabs the dog, but releases him shortly after. Margaret catches the dog and tries to continue her conversation, but the eagle grabs the phone when trying to get the puppy again. Grace and Gammy smile, thinking that Margaret is playing with the puppy, when she is in fact trying to entice the eagle into releasing the phone. Andrew comes outside and tells Margaret to get dressed because his family wants to take her out. Later, Andrew was called by his father, who's hitting golf balls on the lawn. His father wants him to stay there and take over the family business. But soon gets disappointed as Andrew is not interested in their business, and reveals he loves his job in New York, and dreams of being an editor one day. Margaret has been taken to a bar, where Ramon, a local and waiter from the party, is also a stripper. Grace puts a veil on Margaret, and forces her to go on stage, where he dances around her. She's visibly uncomfortable and heads outside the second he's done. Gertrude joins her and explains that Andrew proposed her the night before they graduated. She rejected him as he wanted to run away with her to New York. Gertrude believes Sitka is her home and doesn't want to be anywhere else, but she is happy he found Margaret. When Gammy, Grace, and Margaret arrive at the house, they find Andrew hacking away at an old canoe. Grace rushes inside to yell at Joe and urges him to accept Andrew's decisions before they never hear from him again. Grace heads upstairs for a shower. Andrew doesn't realize that they've arrived. He's listening to his music very loudly, and decides to go for a shower. Margaret realizes that she forgot to grab a towel. She attempts to grab a towel, and he attempts to head to the bathroom. They bump into each other, and are shocked to see each other naked. They run into separate corners, trying to cover up while explaining themselves. Later that evening, Margaret asks what is the problem between him and his father, which Andrew refuses to answer. Margaret then opens up to him and reveals about the tattoo on her back, which she got it when she was 16 after her parents died. She also reveals that she's not as tough as she seems. After Bob yelled at her and called her names, she wept in the bathroom at work. Andrew listens attentively and was shocked by that revelation. The next morning, Margaret frantically wakes up Andrew, and he jumps into the bed and they pretend to snuggle, while his mother enters the room with breakfast. A moment later, his father Joe enters the room. They announce that they'd like Andrew and Margaret to marry the next day in the barn like they did, where they all can be together. Andrew and Margaret try to refuse, but Gammy enters and urges them into agreeing, so she could see her only grandchild wedding before she dies. After they leave, Margaret immediately falls into a domestic role, bringing Andrew muffins and coffee in bed. She realizes her enjoyment of this and hurries to dress and leave while Andrew is ignorant of her behavior. She grabs a bicycle and heads into the forest, where she comes upon Gammy chanting to Mother Earth. Gammy urges Margaret to join her and gets Margaret to begin chanting herself, which is witnessed by Andrew, who was walking nearby. He informs her that her replacement phone has arrived and is going into town to pick it up. Upon reaching the town, she's surprised to find Ramon working in the Paxton convenience store. He programmed and charged her phone a little before handing it to her. Andrew takes her to the internet cafe to check her email, and he sees Gertrude, who was passing by. She watches jealously as he talks to Gertrude outside. Later, Grace and Gammy arrive, and take Margaret to a dress shop, where she tries on Gammy's wedding dress. Gammy makes alterations, and presents Margaret with a necklace, which has been in their family for more than a century. She is visibly moved by that, and tries to reject the gift, but cannot because of Gammy's persistence. She hurriedly meets Andrew at the dock and speeds off into the lake. Andrew tries to find out what's wrong, while she begins to panic and freak out about their arrangement. She explains that she's panicked by his loving family and fears that Gammy and the family will be crushed if they ever learn the truth. He takes the wheel while trying to calm her down, and accidentally causes her to fall overboard. He rescues her and promises that they'll be okay. When they arrive home, his father leads them into the barn, where Mr. Gilbertson, the immigration agent, is waiting. He explains that he contacted Mr. Joe Paxton and explained that he believes their marriage is a sham. Joe urges Andrew to take the deal while it's available. Andrew, realizing that would land Margaret in prison, stands by his word and insists that their relationship is valid and they'll get married tomorrow. Margaret insists that Andrew consider his options when they are alone later, but he insists they continue with their plans. Gammy interrupts and wants to take Margaret away, in order to avoid bad luck in their tradition, and the groom can't see the bride before the wedding. At the wedding, Margaret is walked down the aisle by Gammy as Andrew waits at the altar. They turn to face the marriage officiant, Ramon, another of his jobs. He begins the ceremony, but Margaret is filled with guilt, and quickly interrupts the ceremony, confesses the truth to the guests and Gilbertson. He rejoices in being proven right as Margaret heads out of the barn. Andrew tries to find Margaret and heads up to the bedroom, but Margaret has already left. He finds a letter, where Margaret reveals that she didn't publish his book on purpose, because she would lose him as an assistant, and wishes him an amazing life. Gertrude arrives and makes him realize that he's fallen for her. Mr. Gilbertson explains that Margaret has 24 hours to pack and head to Canada. Andrew decides to go after Margaret, but is stopped by his father, who expresses his disapproval. They argue, but stop when Gammy falls to the ground with a heart attack. They carry her aboard a plane to take her to the hospital. On the plane, she makes them promise and reconcile. They agree, and she gets up and asks the pilot to take them to the airport, and it turns out that she was faking it all that time. Andrew arrives and tries to have an old friend stop the plane, but he's too late and the plane takes off. Joe apologizes to Andrew, as he realizes he really loves Margaret. Back in New York, Margaret is packing her stuff, but no one pays attention or tries to help her as she tries to have her boxes shipped to Canada. Andrew arrives out of breath, and begs her to stay. He confesses his love towards her and proposes marriage, so he can court her. She tries to hide her feelings, but couldn't hold her feelings and finally accepts. They kiss and are applauded by the entire office. They go to Gilbertson and inform him that they are again engaged, but for real this time, and they are ready for the interview. Make sure to subscribe, and turn on notifications to watch more videos like this.